Uh, So for lesson number 1, this is for week number 2, no? So for yung week number 1 po natin ay ang ating general orientation happened last August 31 up to September 3. No? So ngayon po, this is the first lesson entitled as Communication Processes, Principles, and Ethics. So first off, we must know what is communication. No? So we are very unaware pero sa lahat po ng even the gestures, no, yung mga uh, titik ng mata or yung pilik mata, ng kilay, ng pagtango, no, is another form of communication. But the communication itself came from the Latin term communicare, which means to share. It is communication is the act of conveying meaning to a person or group of people using mutually understood symbols, gestures, behaviors, and semiotic rules. No, so one example for that, us being a Filipino, no, when we say umuoo tayo or sumasang-ayon tayo or we agreeing on something, no, minsan hindi tayo nagsasalita pero ginagawa natin, tinataas natin yung isa nating kilay or tumatango tayo up and down na ating ulo, no? So that is another form of communication kasi hindi lang yung sinasabi, bagkus yung gesture, simpleng gesture, yung mga symbols, no? Yan. Yan yung another form of communication. Also, communication plays a significant role in a day-to-day basis since it is used to persuade, inform, entertain, and motivate. So those are the significant or important role of communication. No, hindi lang natin napapansin yan, pero some of us, no, magaling very persuasive when it comes to communicating to others, no. So for example, we have the politicians, no, that's why we vote for them kasi napapersuade nila tayo or to inform, no, sa communication, important role is to inform yan. For example, we have news anchors, no, na nag-i-inform, no, and also to entertain and to motivate. So the communication process, this is very basic. I think na undergo nyo na ito way back in high school, no? So let's recap na lang, no? So the goal of communication is to transmit information and the understanding information from one person or group to another person or group, no? So yung pagpapasapasahan, no? So this communication process is divided into 3 basic components. First off is a sender conveys a message through a channel to the receiver. Then the sender first develops an idea which is composed a message and then transmitted to other party who interprets the message and receives meaning. So we have 3, no, which is the sender, the channel, and the receiver. So yung sender, sila yung nagkakaroon ng idea, sila yung may mga gustong sabihin, no? And then mapaprocess to through a channel, no? So minsan yung channel nito is yung distance between them, no? So that's why nagvo-varies yung communication ng distance ng dalawang tao. Kaya kung mapapansin mo, no, kung malayo yung tao, we tend to shout, no, something, no, para mas maintindihan niya tayo. Kasi laging iniisip ng sender kung ano ba yung na-receive nung receiver na message para maging successful yung kanilang pagpapalitan ng communication. So, information theorists have added somewhat more complicated language. Developing a message is known as encoding, and interpreting the message is referred to as a decoding. So encoding and then decoding. So encoding, this is somewhat in the part of the sender, and decoding is part of the receiver. So here is a figure of communication model. So as you can see in the first box, we have the sender, and under that we have the ideas. That is because yung ideas ay nilikha or gawa or naisip ng ating sender. And then messages, ano ba yung content ng sasabihin, and then transmission, recipient, and then ano ba yung naging meaning para sa receiver. At napaka-importante po ng feedback, no, para mas makita natin. So for example, dito nag-start, napunta kay receiver, paano ngayon malalaman ni sender na na-receive ni receiver yung meaning ng kanyang ideas. So, dito po papasok yung feedback. And then, magkakaroon na sila ng exchanging of communication. So, yan. Feedback cycle po. No? So, yan. So, understanding and interpreting the feedback. So, sender yan. Tapos, babalik kay, from sender, then sending the message to the receiver. Tapos magfi-feedback ngayon itong si whether through reactions, no? So alam naman na natin na simple lang yan, no, sa araw-araw na ginagawa natin. For example, may ichichika tayo sa best friend natin, parang ganyan, no? So ano ba yung magiging reactions ni receiver? Yun yung mga inaabangan ni sender, no? Yung pag simpleng pagtango, pag iling ng ulo, no? That is also one form of communication na pwedeng maging feedback at ini-interpret ng sender. No? So this is the communication process. So next, we have the principles of communication. First principle of communication is the principle of clarity. No, the thought or idea that needs to be communicated should be spelled properly. The word should be arranged in such a way that the receiver understands the same word which the sender conveys. Pronunciation should always be clear as possible, including the enunciation to avoid misconception. So, most of the times, no, yung mga misunderstanding when it comes to communication is because of its clarity. No, number one din naman dyan na nagkukos is yung cultural diversity natin, no? So, for example, dito sa Pilipinas, no, we have different terms of certain things, no? So, for example, yung in Ilocano, no, we have utong, no? Ang utong naman uh, sa Tagalog or Filipino ay part ng isang babae. Pero dito, pag sinabing utong sa Ilocano is sitaw. No? So, minsan ganun din, no? Nagkakaiba din tayo ng mga perceptions ng mga messages kasi nga may pagkakaiba tayo ng language, no? We have language barrier. And also yung clarity din, no? So meron ding mga ilang part din ng or mga tribo or mga parte ng ating bansa na may mabibilis magsalita, no? Yung mga meron naman sobrang bagal, mahinahon, no? So yan yung mga So number one principle of communication is its clarity, no? Kahit din naman sa pagte-text, for example, no, sa texting, no, way back in 2010, ganyan, no? So, nauso yung term na Jejemon, no? So, meron tayong may mga ginagawa pa, yung minsan may introduction pa, may tuldok, tapos may quit, tapos may tutuldok, then magi-start ng message. So, ganun siya mag-text, no? Meron din namang mga tao na gumagamit ng numbers, no? So, letter A, for example, ginagawa nilang number 4, no? So, may mga ganyan, no? Somewhat, no, some point, no, minsan may mga taong hindi nakakaintindi dito kasi number one, yung clarity ng message, no, para kang nagde-decode ng Morse code kasi parang may kakaiba silang form of text, no, yung mga Jejemon, no. So yeah, so that is number one or first principle of communication, which is the principle of clarity. Next is principle of attention. Attention is very important in communication. One should pay attention to every single detail in communicating. To understand what the sender means, the receiver should be drawn towards the message by paying attention to the emotion, behavior, manner, and gesture so they may respond properly to the message. No? So mapapansin naman natin yan. No? Number one, for example, kung galit yung sender, no? Ano ba yung nakikita ng receiver na emotions habang nire-render nyo yung message? No, ano ba yung mga behavior, no, and yung pagkakakilala natin sa tao, no, yung kanyang mga gestures, kung siya ba ay naiirita, nabobored. Kaya minsan may mga tao din na ano, no, hindi nila alam na yung kanilang that's why, no, napaka-importante nung simpleng gestures, no? So one good example for that na may apply natin ito ay sa kung after nyo graduate, no, yung through interviews, no, job interviews, no, yung mga simpleng gesture habang kayo ay ini-interview ng inyong interviewer ay tinitignan at pinagmamasdan din yan ng mga HR heads natin or yung mga human resources manager, no. So napaka-importante kasi nung simpleng gesture na ginagawa ninyo, nalalaman ng isang tao kung ano ba yung inyong nararamdaman habang sinasabi nyo yung certain message. So always pay attention, no, sa bawat detalye ng inyong mga sinasabi, yung mga sinasabi sa inyo, no, yung mga nare-receive ninyong messages. So that is the second principle, which is the principle of attention. Next, we have the principles of feedback. So a feedback signifies that communication is effective. No? Therefore, it is important to provide feedback once communication takes place. So napaka-importante ng feedback so that the sender will know na yung kanyang pakikipag-communicate sa receiver is effective. No? So that is the principles of feedback. So hindi ko na palalawigin, no, na ano na natin siya kanina. Next is principle of informality. There are major distinctions between formal and informal communication. To emphasize, there are times that formal communication may not accomplish and desired results, so informal communication can be effective and efficient in some situations. It is valid to convey message informally because it is as important as formal communication. Yan. So, number one rule when it comes to communicating, no, when someone is talking, no, for example nagre-relay siya ng message, you should give your feedback through a formal ano din, no, formal type of communication. So it's either you will send them your agreement or through through speaking, no, hindi yung through gestures. For example, ako tinawag kita, anak, nasan yung remote, for example, no? Tapos ikaw, bilang Pilipino, ituturo mo gamit ng iyong labi, no? So, para kang nagkumikis or humahalik, no? So, for example, tinuturo mo, you know, gaganon-ganon mo, so for ganon. And then, that is another form of informal communication. Kasi, bakit siya nagiging informal? Number one, hindi mo nire-receive or yung energy mo ay hindi kapareho ng sender. No? So that is the principle of informality. Minsan kasi yung informal communication ay hindi rin siya effective. No? May mga some situations lang naman. Pero there are some most of the times na ginagamit natin ng informality ng communication is when we talk with our friends, no, yung mga taong kampante na tayo, no. Pero for example, kung gagamitin mo yan during your job interview, no, so ito po ay hindi magiging madali. So that's why, no, you need to level up with the sender's energy, kung paano siya magsalita, no. Dapat pagtuunan mo ng pansin yun. So actually kasali din ito sa in the field of psychology. No? So, sana may psychology kayo para mas maunawaan niyo kung paano makipag-usap sa ibang tao. Next is the principle of consistency. Consistency always matters in communication. To achieve consistent result, one must be consistent in the way they communicate. It contributes to the reputation of both sender and receiver and strengthens the relationship. So the principle of consistency, that's why most of some couples that I know, no, though hindi maganda yung kanilang start, no, pero sila ay nagtagal due to its consistency in communication. Kasi nagmamatter talaga yan, no. For example, no, long distance relationship, and then no, so that's why so many of you, no, and also na-experience ko din naman yung ganong klaseng relationship, which is the long distance, no. Bakit tayo mas nahuhook, no? Number one kasi is yung consistency, no, kasi araw-araw kanyang i-update, no, sasabihin sa'yo kung anong ginagawa niya from time to time, no. That's why, no, because consistency is always matter in communication, just to strengthen the relationship. Okay? So that is the principle of consistency. Next is the principle of timeliness. This principle states that communication should be done at an accurate time as possible. To attain this principle, the sender who conveys the message should make a safety measures when delivering the message. Time is very important. When the receiver is not ready to accept or hear the message, it is therefore not the right time to convey the message. No, yan. So, for example, no, namatayan ka, tapos makaka-receive ka ng magandang balita. For example, no, in your family, namatay si ganito, si kapatid, for example, wag naman sana. This is just an example. So, may namatay sa inyo, tapos yung isang family member ninyo, naging CEO ng company, for example. No? So, i-relay mo ba bilang ikaw yung magiging CEO in the future? I-relay mo ba yon sa iyong grieving family? No, syempre hindi, no? Because we follow the principle of timeliness. Kung kailan ba natin nararapat sabihin at i-convey yung mga ganitong klaseng message. Kasi number one rule natin diyan, no? We learn to sympathize, no, kung ano ba yung pinagdadaanan ng tao. That's why isa ito sa mga no, basic or the most advanced characteristics of a person na natututo tayong maki-adapt sa kung anong nararamdaman ng ibang tao sa paligid natin. So that's why we follow this principle of timeliness. Next is principles of adequacy. This principle is important in communication. Inadequate message creates confusion to the receiver, but an adequate message builds a rapport to both parties. So it is important to deliver adequate message at all times in all respect. No? So kaya kung mapapansin natin, yung meaning ng adequate is, for example, yung importante, straight, no, at hindi nagpapaligoy-ligoy, at kumpleto yung mensahe, no, ay nagkakaroon ng magandang reputation when it comes to communication, no. Mas natututo 'di ba, for example, no, during face-to-face class, no, mapapansin ninyo na yung class clown ninyo, for example, si student A ay isang class clown ninyo, or yung mga prankster, no. So kapag sinabi niyang, uy, may assignment daw, no, I think all of you hindi kayo maniniwala na may assignment kasi yung kanyang personality at yung kanyang reputation sa pagre-relay ng mga messages ay hindi masyadong maganda, no, hindi kayo maniniwala. Pero for example, kung yung president ng inyong SSG, no, or yung Student Supreme Government, for example, nag-announce siya na may pasok daw kayo kahit na may bagyo, no. So lahat kayo papasok kasi yung sender na nag-send ng message ay it has some reputations, no, na yung kanyang mga sinasabi ay totoo at adequate. So that is the principle of adequacy. So next we have the topic of communication ethics. Ethics is the moral system or judgment of what is right from what is wrong, and also refers to the values, conduct, manners, and behavior with the respect of rightness and wrongness of an action. If it is used in communication, we define communication ethics as the governing principles of communication that has to do with the rightness and wrongness as well as appropriateness relevant to the dimensions of communication. Ethical communication advocates truthfulness, accuracy, honesty, and endorse freedom of expression with its diversity of perspective that leads to the respect of other communicators before evaluating and responding to their messages. No, so we all know ethics is the moral system from what is right and what is wrong. No, so kadalasan no the term communication ethics itself no ay nire-relay natin yung ethics or the judgment from what is right and what is wrong sa communication no. So andyan yung dapat yung for it become to a for it will say na maging ethical yung communication, it should be truthful or makatotohanan yung inyong sinasabi, accurate or yung precise no at walang iniiwang impormasyon, hindi katulad ng mga marites natin diyan ng mga kapatid. Also honesty is yung pagiging matapat sa pakikipag-communicate, and yung freedom of expression or yung pagbibigay laya na magbitiw ng mga ekspresyon ng mga kanilang nais na sabihin or ideas. So that is communication ethics. So nire-relate lang natin siya sa ethics. No. So next we have the communication and globalization. Communication and globalization are usually connected with each other. So, as we all know, globalization is yung pagkakaroon ng international connections ng mga bansa. For example, yung pagkakabuo ng United Nations or League of Nations or any other type of group sa pagitan ng dalawang bansa, at yung pakikipagtulungan ng mga bansang miyembro ng isang grupo, no? For example, yung Pilipinas, nagkaroon tayo ng bagyong Yolanda in the year 2011. No, tinulungan tayo ng iba't ibang organizations, mapa non-governmental organization or ng mismong United Nations. No? So that is another form of globalization. No? Makikita natin yung pagkakaroon ng interconnectivity ng mga bansa. Okay? So to attain globalization, communication plays an important part. No, why? No, number one kasi since magkakaiba tayo ng language, no, napaka-importante na meron tayong tinatawag na universal language, and the universal language for us is English. No, that also connects us to globalization. So napaka-importante yung matutunan natin kung paano ang magsalita ng English dahil ito nga yung tinatawag nating universal language. So diyan nagkakaroon ng interconnectivity yung communication and globalization. So to wrap this up, no, I have this certain question. So if we need to communicate so that we can understand what others are saying, then why do we hear pictures? So do you believe, guys, that we can hear pictures?